Hello, amazing to be with you today. I am Natasha Anand and I am here to speak to Tantra, the teachings of Tantra, and really speak to the fundamental, integrated, and holistic practice of yoga. So, this is a, a teaching that is very, very close to my heart. I am from an ancestral background that has its roots in the Vedic tradition. My family is from Mauritius and my ancestors are from the Bihar region of India. And since I was born, I've been practicing sacred rituals, havanas, fire ceremonies. I've been practicing mantra and meditation with my family in, I suppose, more of a religious context. And I'm going to also speak to that, speak to Hinduism and the backdrop of Hinduism in a moment. And I became very, very disconnected to it in my childhood years, my teenagers especially, when I really started to question what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. The priests and my family members wouldn't really explain, why we were taking part, participating in certain rituals, what the meaning was behind it. And so I just became a bit disillusioned, of course, as a stroppy teenager would do, as I did at the time. And when I started to, many, many years later, study energy medicine and different forms of spirituality, I came back to my roots. I came back to the teachings of the Vedanta and Tantra. And I came back to it through, I don't know, I guess by accident. It wasn't, okay, I'm really going to go back to my roots now. I started practicing yoga. Kundalini yoga is taught by Yogi Bhajan and then Hatha yoga. And I started to become curious and unravel the fabric of yoga. And at the same time, I was going to lots of spiritual gatherings and events and starting to see the similarities and the mirrors between indigenous culture and the culture that I had been brought up with, the practices that I'd been brought up with. And so my journey back to my roots to understand what all that stuff was about when I was growing up. And through my teachings, my yogic teachings with my teacher Anand Mehrotra in India, one of the things that I realized about Hinduism itself, which it is commonly thought that yoga is a part of a Hindu religious tradition, and actually Hinduism itself isn't a religion. Following colonization of India, this Hindu religion was created. So it was easy to identify people who were Muslim or Christian as a religion. That made sense. That looked the way that it did in the colonists' minds and appeared that way. However, the spiritual practices practiced by the rest of the people on the South Asian subcontinent was very unknown. It's very, very unknown and very mysterious. A lot of it seemed very esoteric. And so the colonists termed everything else as Hinduism. And so with colonization came the labeling or the creation of Hinduism. And this was very much then projected into the schooling tradition. And so now the ordinary person in India would regard themselves as being in a religion because that's simply how history has presented itself, early modern history. And that's what is being carried forth by various generations. So the original teachings of yoga, yogic practice, philosophy, and science comes from sacred texts, never meant as a religion. These teachings are channeled teachings brought to us anywhere from maybe 15 or 12,000 years ago right through to the last 1,000 years, where noble women and men sat and channeled this transcendental wisdom and knowledge and created the ancient scriptures so that one day we would all be able to read, learn, and absorb this incredible wisdom. And this transcendental wisdom and knowledge came from the field of consciousness, the pure field of consciousness, comes from the field of the absolute, that void or empty space where everything exists. And of course, we know now that scientists are demonstrating that just in saline solution, using pure consciousness, organisms can manifest out of seemingly nothing. And that is because this pure field of energy, pure consciousness, literally contains the information for all of creation. And we see this pure void or emptiness as a Shiva energy. And we see the vibration that comes from that, the information that comes from that in the form of vibration as Shakti energy. And this is the fundamental teaching of Tantra. Tantra meaning energy expansion, Tan, energy, Tra, expansion. And Tantra is essentially union of the soul with the divine, with the absolute, pure consciousness, pure energy. And through this fundamental teaching of Tantra comes everything else, the whole full spectrum teaching and technique of Tantra. So there isn't one way of doing this. There isn't one way of teaching this. So much energy work falls within Tantra. And so much practice and dharmic living, sustainable, holistic living falls within Tantra. Anything that is a means of expanding ourselves, our consciousness, our energy systems, expanding our body, our growth, our mind, anything that expands a fundamental energy is itself Tantra. And I really, I'm very called to share these teachings because there is a fundamental misunderstanding, lack of awareness, which in part has been projected and perpetuated by colonization and by consumerism, by commercialization. The sexualization and the normalization of sexualization has drawn out a particular aspect of Tantra, which is mastering the sexual energy. It is a very fundamental aspect of Tantra, of course, but is only one thread of a whole variety of teachings and practices, philosophy and science. And it, I don't need to go into too much detail because it makes sense given the context of capitalism, consumerism, commercialization, sexualization, and the agenda of everything that's behind that. It makes sense that Tantra itself has been coerced into this funneling, into this narrow view and expression of Tantra. But Tantra in its pure teachings comes from the ancient scriptures. So many of the scriptures, such as the Agamas, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, there are other schools, such as the school of Vidya, where this yogic philosophy was channeled. The scriptures that contain the channeled juice, the wisdom, brought in from the absolute field of consciousness, contain these teachings, techniques, and tools for us to utilize in our exploration of energy, in our expansion of energy, in our practice of Tantra. Within the spiritual teachings of Buddhism, Tantra also plays a very, very central role, because within those schools, within those philosophies, those areas of thought, it is recognized that energy is the fundamental channel by which we expand our mind, by which we do the work on the mind, in order to really transcend the ego, the earthbound materialistic attachments and the grasping of the ego, and transcending that, and coming into union with our entire being, bringing unity into our entire being, and then uniting with the absolute field of consciousness of everything that is around us. Tantra is really key to this. This energy work is really, really key to all of this. So ultimately, Tantra is an integrated practice. It has to be an integrated practice, because not one type of practice alone can create the all-rounded holistic shifts to unite our entire being. So within Tantra, we accept all methods and modalities of energy medicine, many of which were not discussed or practiced in the ancient Himalayan regions and in the times that the scriptures were channeled. Many tantric practices are very new and can be seen more in early modern history. Modalities like internal family systems, for example, which is a type of psycho-spiritual therapy, talking therapy. I personally would argue that, well, and we don't have to argue, but I would propose that IFS itself is a tantric practice, because the very technique that we use in order to release the burdens taken on from traumatic experiences, the very methods we use for that are in themselves energy techniques. We work with the elements, and we release the burdens, we release the energy of the burdens through working with the elements, through releasing through the fire, the water, the wind, and the earth. And to me, that is, it is Tantra, has Tantra at its heart. And so this isn't like, okay, yoga, we may have this idea, we may have an image in our mind when we think of yoga, and we think of yoga poses, we think of yoga pants, we think of these, cool, very daring, super flexible yoga poses, a lot of sexiness around it also. And, that often is the image that comes in our mind. And yoga is so much more than that. Tantra is so much more than that. And as I mentioned before, in order to get the full benefits, in order to practice Tantra fully, to transform and expand our energy system fully, an integrated full spectrum approach is really, really key. So I'm going to take you through the 8 limbs of yoga so that you can understand also how Tantra is very much interwoven into yogic philosophy, science, and practice. How tantric practices themselves are embedded within this way of life, and how through a full spectrum integrated practice of yoga, of holistic integrated yoga, we can expand our energy, in fact, practice a full spectrum Tantra, which ultimately is going to create transformational shifts in our entire existence, in our entire being, the physical vessel, the mind, and the soul, ultimately uniting all of this and uniting us with the divine. Many of us talk about the journey of the soul being one of remembrance, is that we're remembering what we are, who we are, what our soul is, the technology, the power, the infinite nature of the soul. And in yogic philosophy, it is thought that with each life we evolve, our soul evolves or devolves, and whatever level of consciousness we reach in that life, we pick that up in the next life. So if we evolve to a level of consciousness in this life, we're going to pick that up in the next life. And part of what we do is we remember where our soul got to. We remember where we are in our soul's journey on some level, whether that's a really explicit memory, or whether that's a really conscious kind of journey that we take in the physical body and in the mind to really understand where our soul is, or whether it's not so obvious and so not so overt, but there is some remembrance maybe on an energetic or emotional level that's more subtle, that nevertheless encourages us as we move forward in our life. So for me, it's more of a kind of overt thing. I feel very aware of my soul and where my soul is in its journey, and and some aspects of what's happened for me to get to this point, what's come together over various lives for me to get here, and really remembering, seeing images and understanding what happened in my past lives. Not all of them, of course, there's potentially thousands. But I'm really in that. It's really, for me, very much at the forefront of my journey. But as I say, for others, it may not be something that's in someone's real conscious field, but maybe kind of there on a more subtle level. You meet people and you know that they're really on it. They are... they're just in flow, and it's really beautiful, and they have the most beautiful energy and offering to the world, but they may not overtly speak about spirituality or where their soul is, or what happened in their past life. It's just, that is just the way that there is that it is for them, and they on a level they get it. So let's go into the 8 limbs of yoga. I have my notes with me, so I'm also going to be you may see me referring to my notes. So just so that I'm not kind of, my attention isn't waning, or I'm checking my phone or anything. So yeah, these 8 limbs of yoga help to provide a bit of a framework to understand. I guess it's wonderful for those of us who like structure and like to, have a framework to hang our hat on and be like, okay, I get it. I get what this is all about. And for me, this very much mirrors the teachings around the Hermetic principles, for example, the teachings of law of one, the teachings from other ancient scriptures also. The various traditions of channeled transcendental wisdom and knowledge, many of them speak to the same or similar fundamental principles and values, techniques, and I just find that incredibly fascinating. And for me, it's a confirmation that this stuff isn't woo-woo. It isn't a belief, which for me implies that, it's a potentially false. For me, this is all verifying fundamental facts about the true nature of existence, of energy, of matter, of the mind, the technology of the mind, the technology of consciousness, the technology of the body, the DNA of the entire system. All of these various indigenous, ancient teachings coming from different places, different traditions, to me all verify these fundamental facts and phenomenon. So yeah, it's really exciting. The more and more I hear from others who are exploring, discovering new teachings, just to see and feel the parallels. And one more thing I want to say before we go into this on this subject is, and it's connected to this idea of belief and truth and all this kind of thing, is we rely so much nowadays on mainstream science and the media and schools and universities to verify for us, to tell us if something is credible or not, you know. And somehow if a new discovery has this seal of approval from a university or the NHS or a doctor, even sometimes it just has to be as simple as that, then it's like, okay, I trust that and it's credible, and I'm actually just going to live my life now, you know, but following that because somebody told me that it was right, that's, you know, that I trust. And it makes sense, you know, we trust these structures and these institutions. Generations before had trusted them also. In reality, a lot of these institutions, a lot of these bodies are really relatively new, that have emerged in the last couple hundred years. Some of them that only have emerged in the last decade even, you know, or last 50 or 60 years. And a lot of the sacred transcendental wisdom contained within ancient texts and indigenous science and culture have been around for potentially tens of thousands of years. But we have this idea that because it's old, it's outdated. In reality, the new stuff is catching up with the old. And when you unravel, you really study indigenous and ancient science, philosophy, you will start to discover a lot of the practices that were systematically created, followed, you know, that were passed on through the oral tradition, that were very precisely followed. A lot of those techniques we are seeing today being created in the mainstream. So for example, EMDR, and eye movement therapy, which helps to process trauma, which has come about in the last maybe 100 years. It's a lot newer than that. I just don't know the exact date to tell you. The roots of EMDR, I'm not sure also where they would come from, but in yogic practice, there are countless practices that are essentially doing a similar thing. They're using similar techniques to process trauma, to process samskara. Samskara are the impressions left by trauma, which we may see as the burdens. And so this is just one example, but there are many examples. And I encourage you to always verify for yourself before you discount a technique or put it aside for being an old something unheard of. Just verify it for yourself. And by verifying it for yourself, I don't mean just one practice, you know. Sustain a practice in this field, in this area, in this technique, so that you can really experience and verify for yourself the benefits, the impacts, the outcomes of these techniques. And I suppose most of the people watching this video, especially if you're, you know, now 24 minutes in, you know, are pretty bought into all of this. And I guess I'm preaching to the converted, but this is something that we can also really encourage others and create an environment around our offerings and create an approach where the people that we are working with feel like they understand that verifying for themselves is really an important part of building trust within the system, because our internal world, the parts and aspects of our mind ultimately are protecting us, and need to trust that, number one, our soul has this, soul like knows what it's doing, and you know we've got this. But number two, needs to trust that these techniques and these tools are safe, they're not a waste of time, and that they're going somewhere. And the only way that we can do that is by practicing and sustaining that practice. And those parts of us can really start to see and feel and understand for themselves the incredible benefits. So let's get on to the 8 limbs of yoga. So the first limb is yama, and yama is moral discipline. And this is concerned with the world around us, and specifically to the strengthening of the mind. So with the ultimate aspect of yama being moral discipline, the idea is that we, through strengthening and refining our mind, correcting the mind, we come into balance with we come into moral discipline. And we can cultivate yama through the practice of pranayama, kriya, meditation, sacred rituals, mantra, and satsang, which is wisdom, absorbing wisdom. So particularly kriya, which are dynamic energy practices, tools and techniques, particularly kriya, pranayama, meditation, mantra are very sharp tools for refining the mind. Within my practice, pranayama, kriya, mantra, and the wisdom, weaving in the wisdom to my classes, my workshops, my journeys is so important. I love sharing the chunkiest tools for us to refine our mind, because this is so central and crucial to the evolution, the unity of our entire being. And I spend a lot of time focusing on the practice of yama through the various practices that I mentioned. In these times, especially with the new age that we're entering, which is the White Wizard the White Wizard 13-year cycle through the Mayan astrological calendar, this is all about coming into the heart, into our cosmic heart, transcending the ego and coming fully into our cosmic heart. It very much correlates to the cosmic level of consciousness within the Vedic tradition, which is a level of consciousness that is related also to the fourth dimension, which in the Law of One teachings is also where we transcend the ego and we come into our cosmic heart, and we are existing in more subtler levels of energy, and when we are tapping into and working with these more subtle levels of consciousness, these subtle levels of energy, this is where the big work can do to really release, let go, transmute energy, and transcend trauma, fear, transcend ultimately the ego. And it's encouraging us to keep dropping back into the seat of the soul, back into the seat of the soul, back into the seat of the soul, to keep remembering, on that minute by minute in that practice, remembering we are soul, we are not the mind, we are soul, we are not just the mind. So we are soul. The soul does not exist in the body. The soul is the soul, and the body is an expression of the soul. The mind is an expression of the soul. We cannot locate the body, the soul within the body. We cannot locate the soul within the body. Scientists have been trying to do that. And it's not possible. The soul exists in a whole other capacity beyond just this physical dimension, just this relative reality, this physical relative reality that is governed and bound by time, where the body lives. The linear progression of time helps us to collapse into a physical reality. The soul exists beyond this and taps into fields, layers of consciousness, of energy that really transcend this physical reality. And when we tap into these other levels, layers, fields of energy, most of which are timeless, not bound by time. For example, the astral dimensions are not bound by time. And in these levels of energy and consciousness, everything exists. Everything exists that ever has existed and that ever will exist. All the information and the codes for everything that's ever existed and will exist exists in the absolute field of silence, in the astral field, which is connected very closely to that, which really is able to, we're able to draw very easily in those dimensions from, we are able to in this physical reality too, but we have a lot of dense energy that holds us and blocks us from being able to access the infinite information and wisdom contained within the void. And it's very much a part of our journey as a soul anchored to a human body, as a human being. It's very much a part of our journey to learn, to understand how all of that works and to work through that. So on the level of the astral and other dimensions where time, it's bound by space and not time, everything exists. And when we are working with our intention to heal at this level, to tap into this level and heal through our soul, through ourselves at this level, it means that we are healing the past and the future. And so when we drop back into the physical body, when we are back into the awareness of the physical body, we are able to bring that healing that we did at the level of the astral or the level of the timeless dimensions into the physical reality to heal what was in the past and heal what's in the future, which ultimately is going to have repercussions. It's going to have an impact on the now. That's why we do certain rituals, sacred rituals like puja or hawans, which are the fire ceremonies. We are working with, through the fundamental primordial portals, the elements, the fire, the air, the water, the earth. These are the fundamental elements that make everything in this universe. And when we play with this, when we play with fire, when we pray to fire, we play with fire, when we work with fire, we are opening up the very fabric of this relative reality and tapping into these other dimensions, where we are opening up these portals where we can do healing on the past, the future, and that has an impact on the now. And I'm not going to go into any more of that, but I will in my other teachings at a later date. So that was the first limb of yoga, and I'm going to go off on little tangents like that when something comes through and I want to share it. So the second is the niyamas. And the niyamas are the healthy habits and observances that are concerned with ourselves and our environment. So these are practiced through sacred ritual, through sewa, which is service to others, through community or sangha, so through doing community work or community gatherings, through sadhana, which is practice, through personal practice, through proper nutrition and removing toxins from the environment. All of these are healthy habits or healthy practices that we incorporate and integrate and observe in order to keep our environment and ourselves, our outer and inner environment clear. And it's a devotion. It is an act of bhakti yoga, which is devotional yoga. And that's why we want to practice as many of these as we can that makes, that combine and make sense for our individual life, because nowadays we are inundated, especially if you live in cities, with dense energy, stagnant energy, with toxins. And it's really important for us to observe these healthy habits to keep ourselves super, super clear. A lot of the physical toxins are binding on to the emotional, energetic toxins and dense energies, and it's easier for them to stay in the body. When we start to physically detoxify, we find that the bonds between the physical toxins and the energetic and emotional toxins start to dissolve, and it makes it easier for the energetic and emotional stuff to just go. Number 3 is asana, and asana are physical postures, mainly kind of hatha, Ashtanga yoga postures. So the seat of the soul is in the body, and the first aspect of the soul is the first expression of the soul. So asana really helps us to distribute the energy, the prana that we bring into the vessel in order to get to every single corner and every single cell of the body, so that the vessel can be powerful and strong and activate more and more of its technology. And I just want to kind of emphasize again how important asana is for distributing energy. It plays a really key fundamental role here for distributing energy. And so if we are simply practicing yoga for trying to become the most flexible we possibly can, trying to achieve the strongest core so we can do fancy poses like headstands and handstands, and that's, our sole purpose of why we're doing yoga, then really we're missing out on so much. We are absolutely certainly not practicing full spectrum, holistic, integrated yoga. We're not getting the benefits, and actually the asana isn't used to distribute energy. It's used mainly to refine and tone the body, which is, one small aspect of healing and maintaining and refining this whole thing that we are. So the next limb of yoga is pranayama. Pranayama are breathing techniques which give us access to intelligent energy, intelligent wisdom, transcendental wisdom, ultimately contained within the breath, contained within this pure energy. And we can draw and attune from this. So with practicing the breath, bringing in more breath, optimizing our breath, and really tapping into the fundamental qualities of the breath, pure consciousness, we are able to relate to the subtler aspects of ourselves and our environment more effortlessly. We also, through channeling this breath more and more, we are able to channel the higher teachings that are contained within the breath, the pure consciousness, the transcendental wisdom that is contained within the breath, the information contained within the void, the emptiness, and it really isn't empty. It's a little trick there by spirit. It is full of transcendental wisdom and knowledge. So pranayama is also practiced not just through pranayama breathing exercises, but also through breath kriyas. Also, a lot of breathing techniques are very energetically expansive breathing techniques contained within Kriya. So the fifth limb of yoga is pratyahara, and it's sense withdrawal to an awareness of the self through the inward flow of energy. So ultimately it's observation, self-awareness. So when we're aware of the greater silence, our listening changes. We tap into more subtle forms of energy, which as we've discussed before, helps us to tap into and become more aware of the transcendental wisdom and knowledge coming through the higher teachings. We start to develop more self-awareness over our own mind, the parts of our mind, the mind chatter, the monkey mind, what's going on, the ego, the inner workings of our mind, our emotions, our behaviors, what drives us, what motivates us. We unlock various levels of self-mastery over the mind, and ultimately align the mind to our soul, to our cosmic heart. And again, this is a process of trust, radical trust, that as we do these practices and we release some fears through the energy work, we release some of the burdens of trauma through energy work, we're bringing in more self-energy, more abundance of compassion, creativity, clarity, playfulness, courage. We're bringing all of these fundamental self energies into the system, and that encourages us, that breathes life into the system, and it's like a positive feedback loop. So that goes into more commitment, more determination, more energy to put into continuing and sustaining that work. And it also brings more trust into the system, where the parts of us can see, and really feel the benefits. And that in itself becomes a feedback, a positive feedback loops, constantly feeding the cycle. And, practicing self-awareness is so key and crucial to all of this, because it's the main tool and vehicle by which we sustain this work, that we do this work. It's like, it's almost as if the really main chunk of the work is getting to a point of cultivating, really clear self-awareness, really beautiful observance of the mind and the parts of the mind. Because with that awareness, with that magic, then great, we can work on it, and then of course we need to also cultivate the energy to work on that stuff, because sometimes we can still be weighed down by stagnant and dense energy. So it's like, okay, I'm aware, but I just feel so heavy. So there's more work to do, but a big chunk of that work has been done to get to that point where we can really see it, and we can be really upfront and honest with ourselves, and really open, and really I see this, I really see it for what it is, and I can observe it, and not have to blend or be so flooded or overwhelmed with these emotions, but I can see it for what it is, and then I can work towards transforming or transmuting it. So a really, really crucial aspect of this work that we do is the pratyahara, the self-awareness. A big part of my mission is to support others to heal themselves, and ultimately it's the practice of self-mastery. It's taking really full ownership of ourself, of our journey, and mastering ourselves, mastering our mind, mastering our body, and really being in full control. So the ego is dropped to the extent that the mind plays a really important role in our survival, in our protection, and moving forward. Your mind is a beautiful thing, and at the same time, the mind is on a journey of remembering what the soul is and how to work in harmony with the soul and align with the energy of the soul and the cosmic heart. And together, the mind and the soul is incredibly powerful. And I believe that the mind itself is infinite, because the mind also taps into the field of the absolute. The mind at some point, when it's released, a lot or enough, it really starts to take on these transcendental characteristics, and these tools, these also even these skills. The mind, parts of my mind are very psychic, I have dialogue with parts of my mind that you know, they know when something's about to happen. They pick it up in the field. And I'm really curious about that. I'm really curious how aspects of our mind also pick up these tools and these technologies as the body does, as the soul does also. It's very interesting. So number 6 is dharana. It's a state of fluid concentration, flow, to stay present effortlessly. So it's the practice of effortless but fierce presence. So our presence is everything. How we show up in this moment to each other, to ourselves, is an indicator of how, you know, what's going on for us. How we show up for others is an indicator of how we show up for ourselves. So as we expand into a greater fluid state, a greater flow, a greater ability to stay present effortlessly, our consciousness itself starts to experience itself at a higher level, at a subtler level. We start to gain more insight into the very nature of our own consciousness, of our own soul. And this is really difficult to explain because it's something that comes with verification and practice and unlocking your own levels of consciousness. But I'm sure it's something that you all on some level have experienced. As your consciousness expands, you're starting to experience yourself in a different way, you know, in a more subtle level, noticing things that I often with my clients, I often see this where a realization will occur in one of my clients, and it's because it's so subtle. It feels so subtle. The immediate impact is subtle, but actually I know that, you know, there are much more profound, long-lasting, energetic impacts happening that they're going to be tapping into more and more. But because it kind of just feels very like quick and like very subtle, they'll kind of try and write it off sometimes. Oh, I had this, but you know, it's kind of nothing and it's not a big deal. And it's these little, oh, it's not a big deal, it's just something that happened. It's these subtleties that we're starting to really recognize in ourselves, and we're starting to experience that is beautiful wisdom. It's where all the nuggets of wisdom lie. When we start to really pick those apart, we start to understand, we start to see ourselves, perceive ourselves at a different level, at more subtle levels. It's really crucial for us to develop an energetic culture that's really central to our flow, to the way that we do things, to our practice. This is the means by which we expand, by which we journey, which we observe, which we learn, we perceive. It's this energetic culture, you know, really living, being, experiencing. This energetic culture is real, is existence. It's really doing it, and such an important part of this journey. So the 7th limb is dhyana, which is absorption or meditation as a spontaneous action of something that just happens, rather than something that we have to do. So when we're doing meditation, when it's something that's like, I have to do this, it kind of can become a chore. It can become a burden even. It can become like something that we want to achieve, like another achievement, another stat, another point to reach, another thing to put up on the pedestal. And really, the point of dhyana is that meditation we become the meditation. The techniques are taught for us to be able to practice and cultivate meditative states or techniques to get us into that place, to be able to relax, or to be able to concentrate on a single point, or to be able to listen and observe the mind, whatever it is that we are doing, the different aspects of states of mind and states of consciousness that help us to get into a meditative state, in a meditative state. Yes, there's lots of techniques for this, but ultimately, when we move beyond that, we become the meditation as and when we desire. And that meditation is just integrated in a natural part of our everyday life moving forward. So the cooking becomes a meditation, the walking becomes a meditation. You know, the practice, certain practices, devotional practices become meditation. Singing, creative expression, artistry becomes a meditation. Our flow through life becomes a meditation. And we no longer like have this rigid thing that we have to do, like I have to do this thing. It weaves into our everyday life. Our various practices, we become them. We don't have to then have like a routine. Okay, so I'm going to get up and do this practice, and then I'm going to do that practice, then I'm going to meditate, then I'm going to breathe, then I'm going to do that. Some days my practice is going to a sober rave at 7 a.m. and dancing for 4 hours, you know, or putting music on and moving. Sometimes my practice is going into nature and being so in tune and so enthralled and communing with nature and giving offerings to the land and really being in nature. And sometimes that's the meditation practice that I do that day. You know, and not being able to beat ourselves up because we didn't do a certain practice, but we went out and walked in nature. That's kind of missing the point a little bit. So the 8th and final limb of yoga is samadhi. And samadhi is enlightenment or bliss. When the observer, that's us, doing the observing, and the observed, that's whatever we're meditating on, become one. They merge and we become the experience. It's that unity. Unity is ultimately enlightenment. Enlightenment ultimately is unity. Yoga means union. And Tantra are the expansive energy practices that help us to do what we need to do to unite the soul, the mind, the body with the absolute field of consciousness, with a realization of what we truly are, the infinite potential of the absolute of everything. So yeah, these teachings in itself are, yeah, they're pretty awesome. They're very comprehensive. I wasn't really sure where an hour satsang would take me and what I would cover, but it seems that for now this is enough. This really is enough. There's so many more facets of this teaching in my yoga 6-week courses, 10-week courses, and in my classes and on my retreats. I share more aspects of holistic, full spectrum living, therapy, all which is contained within the field of yoga. And I love to fuse energy medicine naturopathy, nutrition, yoga, internal family systems, psycho-spiritual therapy, coaching. I love to fuse all of these elements into my own beautiful full spectrum tantric practice. Other themes that I often share and discuss that will be coming at a later date are prana, kundalini energy, what those two are, the differentiation, and how they work together. Sharing more on the breath and the fundamental nature of the breath, why the breath is so important, and how we can work with the breath to refine the mind, to channel transcendental wisdom and knowledge, to do really, really deep healing and releasing. That's another area that I'm really passionate about, and I teach a lot. And I also have advanced pranayama breathing techniques that I've brought back from India, that I've picked up over the years, that I would love to share with you. I also go into teachings around karma and kriya, the two inextricably linked, and teach how to clear our karma and samskara through kriya, and how to develop spontaneous right action and flow into our soul's journey, and really align with our soul and cosmic heart, and how that can help us to release and evolve at a greater level. Share about ancestral work, ancestral healing. I have teachings around sacred geometry utilized within healing. For example, the Sri Yantra is a very sacred technology that I utilize and that I share with my practice. And so I will be drawing on all of these aspects in my work, and I'm really excited to bring, and more, so much more. That's just a little tiny little slitherine of my teachings, and I'm really excited to bring more of those to you at a later date. Please do get in touch and let me know if there's anything particularly that calls you, because I love to be able to flow and respond to my Sangha. My email is mail@natashaanand.com, so that's 2 A's there. I'm available also on Facebook, on Instagram, but it's better to catch me through email. So I've really enjoyed doing this video. I am sending so much love and deep respect for you, deep gratitude, and hope that I see you, connect with you very, very soon.